Hello, and welcome to the Resource Nexus podcast. Today we've got an interesting topic lined up, Drake basketball, and more broadly, the differences between Division I and Division II basketball. Drake is a fascinating case study this season, essentially bringing the coach and core of a D2 team up to the D1 level. We'll break down that transition along with other examples and what it tells us about the talent gap between divisions and what it might mean for the future of college basketball hiring and up transfers. Then, by request, we're going to dive into coaching inefficiencies, things like lineup decisions, rotational mismanagement, and stylistic choices that contribute to losing games on the margins. There are plenty of examples of this, and we'll get into what coaches get wrong and why certain habits persist despite the evidence. But first, let's start with this Drake situation and what it says about the shifting landscape of college hoops. The gap between Division II basketball has always been this mysterious black box, but right now we're watching something incredible. An entire championship D2 team basically teleported into D1 competition, and they're absolutely crushing it. You know what makes this so fascinating? We've never really had a chance to test this theory in such a pure way before. Drake University essentially ran a controlled experiment by bringing in Coach Ben McCollum from Northwest Missouri State. And he didn't come alone. He brought 4 of his starting players with him. That's like picking up an entire core of a D2 powerhouse and dropping them straight into D1. And the results so far are pretty mind-blowing. I mean, they're 26-3 with wins over established D1 programs like Vanderbilt, Kansas State, Miami, and FAU. That's not just competing, that's dominating. You know what's really interesting about this? The historical data from Massey ratings shows that elite D2 teams have often been ranked surprisingly high among all college basketball teams. Like Nova Southeastern was ranked 64th last year across all divisions, and Northwest Missouri State, McCollum's former team, was ranked 66th back in 2019. Here's the wild part. This core of Drake's team wasn't even from Northwest Missouri State's peak years. Last season, they were ranked 177th overall and 4th in Division II, which was actually a step down from their glory days when they were winning national championships. We might have be seeing an even more impressive version if McCollum had made a move a few years ago and taken 4 starters from one of his better teams. The fascinating part, they lost their D2 All-American Wes Dreamer, who averaged 18 points and 6 rebounds per game, but they replaced him with Cam Manyawu, a solid D1 transfer who was ranked 381st in the preseason. In our model, that's something they probably couldn't have done at the D2 level. And this isn't happening in isolation. We're seeing similar experiments at other schools. 2 years ago, we had a similar situation at Indiana State. Lincoln Memorial University, under Coach Josh Schertz, stands out as one of the most dominant D2 programs with multiple Final Four appearances and a stellar 32-1 season in 2020, cut short by COVID-19. Schertz's move to Indiana State has further connected the D2 and D1 narratives, and Indiana State's roster that season reflected the core of LMU's success, with former Lincoln Memorial stars Courvoisier McCauley, Cameron Henry, and Xavier Bledson leading the team alongside several other D2 transfers. McCauley was a D2 All-American who averaged 20 points per game. This group has effectively reformed the peak LMU lineup under Schertz in a D1 setting. Achieving a 100th ranking on KenPom that season demonstrates how a top D2 team potentially could thrive in D1 when retaining its core players and recruiting similarly. The team's success provides a compelling case study for how a dominant D2 program like the Lincoln Memorial might have performed had it made a direct leap to D1 competition and was effectively the precursor to what McCollum is doing at Drake, although he had to get McCauley after he made a stop at DePaul first. Cal Poly brought in Mike DeGeorge from Colorado Mesa, and he brought 4 players with him from a team that went 29-5 and made the Division II Sweet 16. Then you've got Paul Corsaro at IU Indianapolis, bringing players from his successful D2 program at Indianapolis. Though those transitions haven't been quite as complete as Drake's, however. What makes Drake such a perfect case study is they were an elite team, even if they weren't as elite as some of their previous teams. It's like watching a scientific experiment play out on the basketball court. Some historical transitions we've seen. Schools like Belmont, Cal Baptist, and South Dakota State all made the jump from D2 to D1. The history here is fascinating. Take Belmont, for instance. They moved up 15-11 in their first D1 season after making 2 straight NA Final Fours. Cal Baptist jumped from D2 and managed a 16-15 record in their first D1 season. But here's the really impressive one. St. Thomas became the first D3 program to jump directly to D1, and they managed to win 10 games in their first season. They're currently sitting at, get this, they're outperforming traditional basketball powers like Syracuse, Virginia, and Miami in the national rankings. So here's what makes this story fascinating. They're ranked 118th in the net rankings, which might not sound impressive until you realize they were competing in D3 4 years ago, and they nearly knocked off number 8 Marquette last season, losing by just 5 points on the road. But those transitions were usually gradual, building their programs over time. What we're seeing with Drake is this D2 core led by a D2 coach and star player is like instant teleportation. They're competing at a high D1 level immediately. Looking at the historical Massey ratings, it seems like the elite D2 programs have consistently ranked among the top 150 D1 teams, and those rankings were just theoretical until now. Drake is giving us real, practical evidence. It's particularly interesting because McCollum's Northwest Missouri State program was absolutely dominant. They won 4 D2 national titles in 5 seasons. And they would likely have won 5 if COVID hadn't canceled the tournament. And now we're seeing how that same system and most of those same players perform against D1 competition. The level of execution and chemistry they showed has been remarkable. Bennett Sturts is a workhorse playing over 39 minutes a game. Pocket that for the future minutes debate in the following segment. Mitch Mascari is also playing over 38 as well. Playing your stars more helps you win. They are about to do this by playing at a slow pace that keeps them fresh and on the court, which allows them to have the better players out there making an impact longer. You don't need as many good players if this is your style. I've always said I think the Tony Bennett slow pace is the best style to max players. We've seen it since the Princeton days, where less talented teams sat on the ball as a way to compete. The drawback you have to factor in, however, is it's harder to recruit players because most don't want to be in that system with deflated stats. Bennett Sturts has another year of eligibility, so if Ben McCollum were to leave, he'd probably follow him to a Big Ten level of job. It'll be interesting to see how he performs at that level, if it happens as well. So what does this tell us about the true gap between divisions? Well, it suggests we might need to completely recalibrate how we think about college basketball hierarchy. The gap between the very best D2 programs and mid-level D1 teams might be much smaller than we thought, and this could have broader implications for how athletic directors approach coaching hires and program building. It should anyway, and more doors should be open to D2 transfers as well. Last season, there were 80 Division II to Division I transfers. That number has increased to 132 this season. I think we see a similar increase next year, especially with the exit of COVID super seniors. If a D2 coach can bring their system and players up to D1 and succeed immediately, that changes the calculation. Ready-made, successful teams. It's not just about finding someone with D1 experience anymore, though I imagine not every D2 program could make this kind of transition successfully. It needs to be a top 5-1 to assure success, probably. This is definitely a special case. Northwest Missouri State was an absolute powerhouse under McCollum, and he brought the core of that success with him. But it does show what's possible when everything aligns perfectly. This could be one of those watershed moments in college basketball, the kind that changes how we think about program building and the relationship between divisions. Well, one thing's for sure. A lot of athletic directors are going to be watching Drake very closely, and they might be taking a closer look at successful D2 programs too. Success breeds imitation, and if Drake keeps this up, we might see more programs trying to replicate this model. Moving on to our second topic today, coaching inefficiencies. We're breaking down some of the biggest coaching inefficiencies I see. Those little avoidable mistakes that lose games on the margins. From bizarre rotation choices to overthinking foul trouble, we're diving into the low-hanging fruit that coaches somehow still manage to mess up. Last week I watched a team I've seen a few times this season, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Two of their best players, both averaging around 18 points and 7 rebounds per game, were coming off the bench in the same game. Not only that, but both had a PERs around 25, making them easily the stars of the team and two of the top statistical players in the entire conference. I won't call this coach out directly here, but one of them dropped 15 points in 26 minutes. The other, he went off for 28 points on just 15 shots, grabbed 10 boards, and even hit the game winner in a 1-point road win against the 225th ranked team. You'd think that kind of performance would warrant heavy minutes, right? Well, he did play 33 minutes. But here's the kicker. He only got there because the coach played him each half without a single rest break. And that's what happens when you bring a guy in 3 minutes into the half or wait for the first media timeout. To get him to 33 minutes, you have to keep him in the whole time. But here's the issue. If you start him instead, you can actually manage his minutes better. Give him a solid 3 or 4 minute breather of game time action about 10 minutes into each half, keeping him fresh for crunch time. You just wasted that rest break by bringing him off the bench and then playing him 17 minutes straight. It's just a complete mismanagement of maximizing your best player's abilities. And then there's the other side of it. If you're going to play your stars with no in-half rest anyway, then why not at least push them to 35 plus minutes in a 1-point game? If they're going to be tired regardless, at least get every possible minute out of them. 3 extra minutes of a who is a 25 PER player can certainly impact winning in a 1-point game where he has 28 points and 10 rebounds like he did that day. And I'm sitting there thinking, my guy, what are you doing? If you're already planning to ride him with not rest for an entire half, why not just squeeze out another 3 to 4 minutes? Especially when you've already shown you're willing to play both of these guys 44 minutes in other games. It's just common sense. Multiple games they have played 38 to 44 minutes, in fact. Fast forward 2 weeks, same team, same opponent, and this coach decided to bench the guy who had 28 and 10 in the first matchup, and it gets even crazier. With 9 minutes left in a 2-point game, he put in a walk-on freshman who had played in 7 games all year and hadn't seen the floor in 42 days. Then he moved a 6'3", 180-pound player to center. Meanwhile, the star of the team we are talking about, a 6'8", 6th-year star senior, was sitting on the bench with 7 points, 4 rebounds, who averaged 18 and 7 and had 28 and 10 on this team and was drawing doubles every time opening it up for others. And the worst part? He sat the rest of the game. That included the final possession, where they had a chance to win, and he had already hit a game winner. That included the opening tip-off, which the opposing center won the actual tip. And despite all this, the team somehow survived in overtime. But that was with their best player voluntarily benched for 21 available minutes. These are the kinds of mind-numbing decisions I keep hearing coaches and fans defend with the whole 3D chess argument. I had fans of this team tell me it was smart and he coached a great game and give all kinds of excuses and calling scoreboard. Listen, if you're benching a guy averaging 20 a game who ranks 4th in PER in conference play, in a conference game, you're just overthinking it. Process over results sometimes matter, and over time in the aggregate, this will lose you games. And here's the thing. This isn't an isolated case. I've watched the same coach lose multiple games pulling these random benching stunts with his third best player playing 6 minutes one game to a team they lost to in overtime. It doesn't always work out. Yeah, I see this every single week, every single year. Coaches overcomplicating the simplest things, fouls, rotations, benching patterns, you name it. And so today we're diving into all the ways coaches overthink the easy, low-hanging fruit and how it ends up costing them games, in my opinion. And you can see if you agree or not. Let's get into it. Short bench versus long bench. That's the question. You probably heard about the old school NBA, right? Back in the 1960s, players like Wilt Chamberlain played a whopping 48 minutes per game. Yep, you heard that right. Wilt even managed 48.5 minutes on average one season, which includes overtimes. And get this, he did all that in Converse All-Stars with none of the modern training, nutrition, or travel that players have today at crazy pace too. Pretty crazy, right? Even when Wilt was 36 years old, he was playing 43.2 minutes per game. That's a 300-pound guy still logging major minutes at that point and playing all 82 games. Certainly some players' genetics allow for more abuse, but load management or all the advantages of travel, sleep science, training, medicine, and nutrition wasn't a thing, yet these players stayed healthy more. How? Now, we're living in the era of the three-pointer with defense chasing shooters in space being at an all-time high. I do believe, especially in the NBA, all these sprinting closeouts do put far more stress on the soft tissues and joints, but I also believe this is much less of an issue in college basketball where you aren't playing 82 games plus playoffs, 48-minute games, and even back-to-backs more than once or twice a year. No wonder NBA players need to rest. In fact, most key players in today's NBA are in their late 20s or early 30s, and teams have tens of millions invested in these players. The last thing a team wants is to risk injury by overloading them during the regular season, yet you still consistently see rotations cut down during playoffs with the best players logging the most minutes. Teams save their star players for high-stakes playoff moments. Now let's talk about college basketball. It's a whole different ball game. College players are typically between 18 and 22 years old, playing on a 40-minute clock with a 30-second shot clock. And unlike the NBA, they only play about 35 games a season. That's nowhere near the grind of an 82-game NBA schedule. In conference play, that usually means 2 games a week, with a bye or 2 sprinkled in. They're young, they play fewer games, and the pace way slower, far fewer possessions. These players are still developing their skills, and even though NIL has brought in the money, coaches are under more pressure than ever to maximize the talent they have right now. That's why playing their stars heavy minutes in the regular season just makes sense. We're literally talking about 5 to 10 extra minutes per week. In an entire week, how much impact can you get out of, say, Zach Edey? Play him 33 minutes as a junior instead of 19 as a sophomore, and with the same 40 PER statistical impact, the difference is massive. He always could have played more minutes and been just as dominant. Studies like the Millsap doctrine show that most players actually perform better when they're not looking over their shoulder, worried about getting yanked. More minutes mean more rhythm, more time to get warm. Even if a star player starts slow, if you know they're operating at a 25 to 40 PER level, you leave them in the game. Because how many times have we seen a guy go on a 10-point scoring run out of nowhere? And you play those odds over a backup all day long. Let's talk about Coach K. He was famous for playing his best players heavy minutes, even on the big stage. Look at Duke's 1991 to 1992 team or the 2015 championship squad. Coach K typically didn't rely on deep rotations. His players often played 30-plus minutes per game, and the strategy clearly paid off. It wasn't just about stamina or conditioning. Chemistry played a big role, too. When you have fewer guys on the court, they build a connection and understand each other's movements much better. That's a huge advantage, especially in big games. Here's the thing. Team chemistry is often overlooked. When you play a deep rotation, you risk sacrificing that connection. Just look at UNC's 1993 to 94 team. They brought back most of their squad, including the stars from their championship run, but struggled to find cohesion while trying to incorporate a stud freshman class of Jerry Stackhouse and Rasheed Wallace. They went 10 deep and tried to play them all, and it cost them. They got bounced in the second round of the tournament, even though they were a more talented team undoubtedly. Fast forward to 1995. They tightened the rotation, rolling with 7 players, including a walk-on, out of necessity, and made it all the way to the Final Four. Fewer players meant better chemistry, and it showed. That realization made an impact on me in my formative years. Sometimes less really is more, and chemistry matters. Rick Pitino's 1995 to 96 Kentucky team took a different approach. They went 10-plus players deep, and it worked wonders for them. They won the national championship, but their style of play was completely different from Coach K's. Pitino's system was built on speed, pressing every possession, running teams into the ground. Now, while that worked for his system, I still believe a shorter bench often leads to better results when the goal is chemistry and maximizing talent. At the end of the day, Pitino was trading All-American minutes from Tony Delk, only playing him 26 minutes, to make room for the 11th man, Allen Edwards. Sometimes you're so good it doesn't matter, but let's be real. This isn't the way to maximize domination. It's also a recipe for getting upset from time to time. And then there's the tournament factor. When it really matters and you suddenly need your best guys playing 35 minutes a game together when you're getting push, are their chemistry and conditioning at max levels? Probably not. So here's the final thought. Is it better to have a shorter bench or a longer one? Well, for the NBA, a deep bench with lots of rest makes sense, but for college, playing your best players more often is usually the smarter route. It maximizes talent, builds chemistry, and ensures you're ready for those big moments, in my opinion. Some of these teams that have success with 2 star players logging 19 to 24 minutes per game, they're doing it despite themselves. And while Kentucky can get away with it, they're not really maxing out their actual superstars. School like Samford, they'll never be able to do that. And this whole play 10 guys under 25 minutes style will always mean they need to recruit a whole lot more good players to be successful. In the NIL era, over time, I think that strategy's a loser. I know you're probably better off investing big money into 3 or 4 really good players, playing them 35 minutes a game, and squeezing every bit of value you can get out of them. That you don't do that by trading minutes that your second best player could play for the 10th best guy on the roster. You just don't. Now, we're running a little long, but I was going to dive into coaches who sit players with 2 fouls for an entire half. But honestly, I think my audience is smart enough to understand how ridiculous that is. It's a self-fulfilling punishment. You sit a player assuring you'll lose out on minutes all because you're scared he might foul out and not be in the game. But that's exactly what you're trying to avoid. It's one of the most mind-numbing strategies, especially when players usually go home with a foul or 2 to give. If they actually played through those fouls and fouled out, you'd probably still get more minutes from them than with this dumb strategy. That's one reason I respected Coach K so much. I once heard him say that one of the things that made him successful was letting players play through fouls and learn how to do it. All right, that's a wrap for today. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you got some good insights. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who'd find it useful. And don't forget to check out theresourcenexus.com for more in-depth analysis. Until next time, check you later.
Cool. Guess we'll see you around.
All right, check you later.
Bye.
Wait, man, why are you always such a dork, man? What are you talking about? Check you later. Check you later.